Please take a couple of minutes to stretch or move around or just relax. Notice the change of gear from meditation to listening. So recently, I came across this Dhamma talk from Ajahn Amaru, and he quotes Ajahn Buddhadasa. Ajahn Buddhadasa, contemporary of Lumpucha, very highly regarded meditation master all over the world. Of course, he was in Thailand. And so Ajahn Buddhadasa once made the comment that all of the Buddha's teachings can be condensed into 4 words, right? The entire Tripitaka, all the suttas, the Abhidhamma, all the Vinaya, everything that the Buddha ever said, and the commentaries and everything else can be condensed into 4 words. Those 4 words are Sabbe, Dhamma, Nalang, Abhinivesaya. In English, it is don't cling to anything. Right? That's it. It's the beginning and ending of the Buddha's teachings. Lupucha went a step further. He condensed those 4 words into 2. And he said, ploy wong, let go. That's it. Just let go. And everything will be okay. But it's not that simple, is it? How do we let go? And what do we let go of? How is this, and how do we achieve this letting go? What is the result of this letting go? So these are interesting kind of questions that hopefully will inform our practice, right? The prime consideration of our practice is, what should I be doing that's going to move me away from this consistent, almost constant, continuous feeling of lack, feeling of dissatisfaction, feeling of discomfort, probably a feeling of doubt, a feeling of anxiety. How do I move towards something that's not anxious, that's not fraught with discomfort, that does not originate from the desire to have or not to have? So how do we do this, right? Ultimately, that should be the result of our striving, from moving from discomfort to comfort, and along the way picking up or allowing the flourishing and the blossoming of wisdom, cultivating deep understanding, cultivating stability, cultivating openness, cultivating non-resistance. So how is all that done? And we are told that this can be achieved by following the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is divided into 3 categories: Sila, Samadhi, Panya. And Sila is, it has 3 components, and Samadhi has 3 components, and Panya has 2 components. So it seems like an endless kind of series of lists that are offered. So you start with letting go, and the letting go is done through this path, and this path has 8 parts, and each part has 2 or 3 subparts, and where does it end? And it can become a very, very intellectual pursuit if we approach it from that manner, because we're constantly looking, comparing, is this right, is this wrong, is this part of the Noble Eightfold Path, is this not part of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And so instead of actually moving away from anxiety and doubt and a feeling of lack, we become really, really capable at reinforcing these. Well, at least I do. I don't know about you, but um, so then, what are the things we can focus on in order to, first of all, move away from this kind of intellectual approach to meditation and move towards something that's a little more relaxed, something that's a little more spontaneous, something that just arises from within, something we don't have to judge all the time, something we don't have to grapple with all the time, something that we can, just take it as it comes, take it as it is. And that would actually be a beautiful way to live, not just meditation, but everything that we do off of the cushion can be guided by these principles. Right? So, what are these kind of principles? And that and it's interesting because in order to kind of leave aside a very deep intellectual approach to meditation and life, it's not that we have to push away the intellect, because if we push away the intellect, we're going back into this idea of I shouldn't think. I shouldn't think. Thinking is bad. So again, we move towards judgment. We move towards um, what is called alienation, a rejection of whatever's going on. So if I have a thought and a thought arises, and I'm constantly battling that because I don't want to think, I'm not being very wise. So a key to that is, okay, let's try and understand this process of thinking. If we try and understand this process of thinking and have a certain idea in the back of our heads as to, oh gosh, this is what I'm doing now. This is what's actually happening. This is how I'm approaching this. This is habitual. Then it becomes much, much easier not to be driven along by it, not to be carried away by it. And interestingly enough, it's exactly this idea that the Buddha talks about as soon as he is fully liberated. One of the first utterances after his enlightenment, he uses a phrase called visankaragatan chittam. So a heart or a mind that is without formations, that is without creation, which is actually the basis, the ground from which all thought springs, the basis from which all ideas spring, the basis in which memory resides, the basis which forms the ground for judgment, that forms the ground for evaluation, forms the ground for acceptance or rejection, whatever it is. And this visankaragatan chittam is the is the aspiration, the goal of a meditative life. And to live life in a way that we do not come from preconceived notions. We do not follow habits. We do not follow ideas. We're not constantly defined by, or neither is any experience consistently defined by this kind of judgment and um, this kind of acceptance or rejection, this craving or clinging, or at the same time not wanting, not becoming. And this meditation that we did uh, is a good way of actually touching that, where we are actually building a capacity, we are cultivating an attitude that is open, that is relaxed, that is broad, and that allows everything to come in. That does not say, I choose this over that. Right? And very often the question is, but how can I meditate without an object? Well, make that your object. The anxiety of not having an object during meditation can be the object of the meditation. Yeah, all that's fine, Bhakti, but then when I meditate, I get distracted and my mind goes flying off. Yes, but noticing a moment of non-attentiveness is attention, right? So it's not that the attention goes somewhere. It's not that the knowing goes somewhere. It's just that something comes and overtakes this knowing. Something comes and veils this knowing. Something becomes more urgent, more demanding, more prominent. And so immediately our attention is grabbed by that object. Right? And if our attention is constantly being grabbed by objects, constantly being overtaken by moods, constantly being a slave to the habit of going out all the time, then where is really the occasion for a certain level of peace, a certain level of silence, a certain level of comfort? Right? And it is this peace, silence, and comfort that is achieved by cultivating an attitude that is very open, very welcoming, um, that does not kind of choose. I think choice is quite dangerous. Right? So the more we move away from choice, the more we move away from judgment, the more we move away from a kind of value attachment that we do to everything that comes into our experience, then the possibility of every moment being spontaneous, every moment being fresh, every moment being the present moment, all that it is, without adding anything to it, without taking away anything from it, that possibility becomes very, very real. And whenever we kind of look at the Buddha's teachings, there are two aspects of the teachings that are actually very instructional towards this. And he says, Kevala Paripurnam, Kevala Parisuddham. So anything that is completely whole, right? It's complete. And that means it is not, it has no lack. There's absolutely nothing lacking. Right? And Parisuddham, it needs no refinement, it needs no cleaning, it needs nothing extracted from it. So it doesn't lack anything, and nothing needs to be taken away from it. And so these two aspects have been very, very instructional for me when I have been trying to formulate how I practice, how I approach this life of meditation, how I approach daily tasks. And it's not easy because I fail all the time, right? I do get into habitual patterns of judgment. I do get into habitual patterns of assigning values. But a recognition of that is the first step towards moving away from it. Right? And this is what gives a really, really relaxed attitude. And this is what Luang Cha actually called the holiday of the heart. And in order to get to that holiday of the heart, it's always useful to develop a broad direction in which our commitment has to lie. And this is what is called Sammaditthi, one of the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, is actually formulating a mission statement for our life, if you will, right? I know that sounds very corporate, but probably if you had a big banner, that's, whatever you want to say in that banner would be the direction that your life has to take. And for me, that's very simple. For me personally, it is to understand the nature of craving. And the more we try and understand the nature of craving, we very quickly realize that the nature of suffering is exactly the same as the nature of craving, right? Because craving is neither paripurnam nor is it parisuddham. So craving is not something that's whole, because if it's whole, we wouldn't be craving, right? Craving arises because of a lack. I want this, I don't want this, this is good, this is bad. Ooh, how I wish, Oh, I really love my whoever, my dad or mom or my brother or my partner, but only if they were just a teeny weeny bit different. Just that little bit, then it would be perfect. Or yeah, I love my car or I love my phone, but if it were just the iPhone 16 Max instead of the iPhone 16, that would just make it so much better. Just that little, I just need that little bit. Yes, but that little bit is cumulative, and that little bit never seems to go away, right? Never ever seems to go away. So it is important to understand that both the nature of craving and the nature of suffering is something that is very, very compelling, something that automatically implies a lack, right? And it creates stress, it creates a sense of unpleasantness, it creates a sense of unease, right? And so this idea that if I have this extra thing, or if I have this one more thing, or if somehow, if this thing that I have is somehow better, I will be happy, is a fallacy. And the quicker we get to terms with that, the better our life is going to be. Now, this is something that we hear all the time, but it is something that becomes very, very hard to implement in life. Um, and we notice the struggle all the time. But the fact is, most people don't even notice the struggle. So I think even noticing the struggle is taking a few steps on the right path, moving from dissatisfaction to satisfaction, from discomfort to comfort, from, say, something that's constricted to something that is free. And once we notice the nature of this craving, then it becomes easier to check ourselves. Okay, I'm going down this path now, not really helpful. Let's do something else, right? Create a change, create some other way of pursuing another direction, or uh, moving from craving to, say, just watching the craving. Let's see what happens. Okay, yeah, I know I want something. I'm not going to act on it. Now, I'm not rejecting this craving. I'm not judging this craving. And I'm not saying, oh, bad monk, you shouldn't be craving. No, no, no. I'm just watching it. Just watching. And then see what arises when we are patient, when we are watching, instead of constantly giving in to that craving all the time. So these are kind of some ways by which we can understand the nature of craving. Now, having understood the nature of craving, it's also important to keep in mind that instead of instead of constantly allowing these habits of the mind to take over and tell us, you got to do this or you got to do that, you got to get this, you got to get that. Instead of that, actually giving a certain direction, a broad direction. We're not trying to control anything here, but a broad direction that, or certain guidelines that we can actually employ that make this, that bring this understanding into practice, right? So when we notice craving, we try and move away from this unwholesome habit of constantly grabbing to a habit of resistance, not to a habit of renunciation, to an attitude of renunciation. Yes, I want that, but what happens if I don't get it? Right? Just going to see what happens. Yes, there's a comment from Lorena. Evaluation seems, let's, evaluation seems inevitable, but judgment is optional. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Judgment is optional. And this is what the Buddha calls the second arrow, right? One of the ways of looking at that simile. There's a soldier who's fighting a war, and there's an arrow that comes and hits him embedded in his chest. And instead of focusing on getting the arrow out, he wants to know who sent the arrow, which direction the arrow came from, what is the what is the wood that composes this arrow, what is the arrowhead made of, and all these other details that are not really relevant. What's relevant is to somehow get the arrow out. And so, yes, judgment is optional, absolutely. And so, having set aside, or having set this kind of directional understanding, having created a directional understanding, then we create certain kind of um, strategies that we can employ that bring this understanding into daily life. So how we notice craving, how we renounce this urge or renounce this tendency to always satisfy this craving, right? And then, so there is something very wholesome in saying, yes, I know I want that, but I'm just going to see what happens. And I'm not going to put in any effort to actually go in pursuit of this thing that I want. And I'm just going to sit back and observe what happens. Now, there's immense value in that because, first of all, this engenders, or this actually requires a tremendous amount of patience. This requires a tremendous amount of non-resistance. And these are the principles on which renunciation is actually based. This Pali word chaga or Sanskrit word tyaga is actually that, is just not holding on, just kind of releasing the grip, relaxing the grip. Right? Ploy wrong, let go, sabeda manalanga binivesaya, whatever, however you want to say it, comes down to these things. Just being patient, right? And watching, allowing everything to arise. It could be the most intense anger. It could be the most annoying frustration. It could be the most compelling sense of lust or whatever that arises, right? Anything that arises. Instead of saying that it's bad and pushing it away, if we can employ a moment's patience to just stand back and watch, then what happens is that a lot of space gets created around this feeling that is demanding, around this sensation that is compelling. And in that space, there's great freedom because this thing that compels actually loses its energy in that space. Right? And that's another nature of craving. It's another nature of suffering, is that it's accompanied by a very constricted feeling. Nature, craving, suffering, aversion, anger, hatred, alienation, all of these things have this deep, deep You can actually, I mean, if we actually feel it, it's tangible in the body. And this feeling of something being cramped, something being tight, right? And by creating space around it, that tightness gets a chance to relax. And we are actually not doing anything, like we're not pushing it away, we're not judging it, but we're just creating space around it by giving it that moment's patience, by giving it that moment's a moment of attention, moment of kindness, a moment of gentleness. And then there's space, and in that space, there's an unwinding. And so, kind of always encouraging our attitudes to be in that manner, right? And this is what the Buddha always says, Sabba Papa Sakarana, Kusalasa Upasampada, Satchitta Pariyodapam. That means it's quite, you know, setting aside anything that is unwholesome, not pursuing anything that is unwholesome, embracing the wholesome. And then if we actually stay away from things that are unwholesome, if we embrace whatever is wholesome, then automatically there is a freedom, there is a relaxation, there is a cleansing. And then the heart gets this opportunity to be absolutely free. And along with that, it's not enough if we have this kind of mission statement and we have this encouragement of somehow bringing that into action. We also need to constantly remind ourselves that this is the pursuit, right? An insight is spontaneous, arises, stays for some time. It can be extremely powerful, but if that insight is not nurtured, and if we don't keep reminding ourselves of the insight, and if we don't keep um, emphasizing that insight, then that insight gets lost. It's not, and this is what is called sammasati. So sammasati is not just being 100% mindful. It's not, I bring the spoon slowly to my mouth and count 45 times that I chew and I swallow and I feel, okay, all that's fine. All that's fine. Uh, but more importantly, it's remembering these insights, remembering these moments of patience that we have had when there has been an intense, there has been an occasion where we are facing an intense demand to satisfy a craving. And so it's these three things. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, if you have the right direction or the right view, the right strategy or the right effort, and the right remembering or the right mindfulness. So Sammaditthi, Sammavayama, Sammasati, all the other 5 factors will automatically fall into place. Right? So, and a reflective attitude to understand the nature of craving and suffering, uh, putting forth effort and energy into actually translating this understanding into day-to-day life, and finally remembering it all the time, dedicating ourselves to it again and again and again. And, even if we fail 9 times out of 10, remembering to celebrate that one time where we actually won. That's the most important. The 9 times that we failed is not important at all, because that's natural. That is natural. Our bodies are rooted in desire. Our whole being is rooted in craving. Lupo Sumedo calls our body a desire form, right? And that's what it is. It is, that's what it is. So if we fail 9 times, chalk it down to nature. But if you win once, chalk it down to yourself and celebrate it. That's important. And that's what we fail to do. We are so focused on all the things that I do wrong, never celebrating anything that I've done right. So I'd like to offer these thoughts for your consideration. And please, if there are any questions, opening it to the floor.
Hannamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karam Dadadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodam. Thank you so much, Bhante. I'd like to start with the first question. I didn't quite hear when you were talking about the two things. Did you say the Buddha, this non-lack, and was it non-lacking and non-fabrication?
Yes.
Can you tell me
Yes.
the Pali again for those two terms, please?
Sure, it's right there in even in the introduction chanting. Kevala parisuddham, kevala paripunnam. So the Buddha's teachings, the Dhamma, is supposed to be kevala parisuddham and kevala paripunnam.
Where do I find that? Which chant was that, or what?
Kevala parisuddham, kevala paripunnam, brahmacharyam pakase. So if you go to the morning chanting,
Okay.
Actually, if we can, yes, I'm just getting a chanting book.
Okay. No, yeah, I was. Did you say the Buddha spoke these terms after his awakening?
No, that was a different thing.
Okay.
We'll come to that. But
Okay.
this aspect that I have
Because the
always,
non-lack, the whole and complete, it sounds very Mahayana, well, all beings whole and complete, just as they are. So I just wanted to see where I could find that in the chants of the sutras.
there are many places where you can find it, but I'll show you where it is, in the chanting. But all of these ideas, before Mahayana and Theravada came, the Buddha taught out of his wisdom, right? So
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that
yeah.
point, where was Mahayana? But I'm like you, I love those phrases.
It's okay if we can't find it now. You and I
No,
can
no,
chat another time. So,
no, it's not. Just give me a minute.
yeah, yeah.
Ah. Karunam yochanti sudhirta. Okay.
You can send me an email because we have other
Yeah,
questions. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think so. I think so.
I'm just curious. Yeah, like you say, it's so much fun to look into some of the.
Yes. So I'll send you that email and you can share it with the group. But Kevala Paripunnam, Kevala Parisuddham, Brahmacharyam Pakasisi. That's what, his teachings, that's how the suttas describe the Buddha's teachings. That whatever he spoke about, okay, is whole, is complete, and it is absolutely 100% pure, Parisuddham and Paripunnam, not lacking, doesn't need anything taken away, not 100% pure. But the phrase that he employs at the first statement after enlightenment is Visankaragatan Chittam. So a chitta without sankharas, free of formations, right? And it seems to be the Zen mind. There's another parallel you can draw. The beginner's mind. Okay. Could you comment on the role of ego in what you taught tonight? Thank you, Lorena. Yes, of course. So when we talk of getting an understanding of the nature of craving, right? It is, where does craving originate? Craving originates with the ego. If there's no ego, there's no craving, right? It is this me and mine that is the problem. So this whole idea, when we read the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, uh, what the Buddha does is he gives us a kind of scheme. He says, you got a physical body, right? And you've got mental aspects that are connected to this physical body. Now, what's happening here is that you're somehow we get into this misconception that this physicality and all this correlated mental activity that goes on is somehow I, is what I am. And the Buddha says, no, that's not what you are. Right? That's why each part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta says, Nesoham asmi nameso me attati. Netang mama, I'm not this. Nesoham asmi, this is not mine. Nameso attati. This is not what I call the self. And so craving gets rooted in judgment. And so the other way of looking at this is when the Buddha elucidates the Four Noble Truths, right? There's suffering, there is the origin of suffering, there is the end of suffering, and there's the path that leads to the end of suffering. The Buddha is actually talking of this human condition from the lens of a healer. So the disease, so the first symptom that we experience from a disease is dukkha, something that is suffering. Suffering is the symptom, right? There is a cause to the suffering. What is the cause? The cause is craving, right? What is the prognosis? Prognosis, yes, you can get rid of these symptoms completely without even the smallest trace. What is the prescription? Prescription is the Noble Eightfold Path. But what is the disease? We spoke about this. Very often we mistake dukkha to be the disease. But dukkha is not. Dukkha is just the symptom. Craving is the origin, right? Is the cause of that disease. There's a prognosis and then there's a prescription. So what is the disease? The disease is avidya, ignorance. And what is ignorance? Ignorance is this wrong idea of me, ego. This wrong idea of what defines that, and that's the whole basis of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, or the idea of anatta is rooted in that. Anything that I see, I feel, I own, I touch, nothing is mine. So what is it that I call I? What is it that is the ego? It's just the birth of craving. And it's this avidya that we are trying to get over. That's why, the conditioned arising, that it always starts with avidya, ignorance. And after avidya comes sankhara, and after sankhara comes da 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 da, all of these things. So what is this avidya? This avidya is ego. Is this idea that me, I think I am Amarasiri, I think I'm a male, I think I'm 49 years old, I think I was born in India, and I think I'm a monk, and I think I'm a good monk, or I think I'm a bad monk, and I think this, and I think that, and then this is mine, and that's mine, and if something that is mine somehow gets challenged, then I get all aggressive and angry and grouchy and grumpy. Or if something pleasant comes into contact with this idea of me and I mine, then I get elated and joyful, and then all's well with the world. That's avidya. So, yes, whenever we look at the nature of craving, whenever we look at the nature of suffering, that stress, that discomfort, that craving, all of this starts with the ego. All of it starts with ignorance. Okay, does that answer your question, Lorena? Great. Okay. Catherine, in relation to evaluation is inevitable, but judgment is optional, is evaluation not a part of forming a judgment? Could you please expand for me on the Buddhist perspective between these terms and they use? Thank you, Catherine. Okay, thank you, Catherine. Lovely question. Um, so let's take an example, right? Um, let's say there's a child, and this child has never eaten a grape before in his or her life, right? Then all of a sudden, someone gives this child this thing and says, "This is a grape." So the child looks at it. Okay, a grape. It's got this shape. It's got this form. It's got this color. It's got this kind of texture. Then pops it into the mouth. For whatever reason, the grape is rotten. So bites into the grape. Oh, I hate it. I hate it. Right? I hate it is one part, but the experience when the taste gets in contact with the tongue, there is immediately this is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So that pleasant and unpleasant is the evaluation. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Marissa and John from Kevala Paripunnang Parisuddhang is on page 5, top of the chanting. Oh, Tantadipo found it too. Yes. So page 5 on top of the chanting book. Sorry to jump all around, but coming back to Catherine. So when when that child bites into this rotten grape, feels something unpleasant, that is evaluation, right? And then says, this is bad. That's judgment. But then evaluation and judgment, how it works in our psyche is that it gets reserved in our memory. So every time that child is presented with that grape, it will always assume that it's going to be an unpleasant feeling. And so all grapes are bad. And so I hate grapes. And so I'll never eat a grape again. Right? This is what's called sanya. Sanya. Nya is to know, some is with. So what does this with come with? This knowing comes with an intense amount of judgment, evaluation, things like that, right? So from a Buddhist perspective, evaluation is the first step. The result of the evaluation is the judgment. So a long answer to a short question. Does that seem okay, Catherine? I can't see you on the screen. So if you can message, where's Catherine? John. Yes, thanks. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. Any other questions? Bob, okay. During the meditation, you mentioned, if I remember correctly, being aware of ever-changing experiences, but noticing if awareness itself is changing. That is, the clouds change, but the sky is always there. The pictures change, but the movie screen remains. Can you elaborate? Well, you've done a brilliant job in elaborating on that, Bob. Yes, that's exactly what it is. This is what Luang Por V calls the background. Um, and this is a really good way of understanding anicca sanya, that is, this perception of everything that's changing, perception of everything that's temporary, right? So, whenever we look at an object, Usually when we meditate, we are trained to pick up an object, give it a lot of attention, aka concentration, and we focus on that, zoom in on that. That becomes our primary concern. Everything else doesn't matter. Um, and when we do that, yes, chitta becomes very, very silent, very, very still. But in that moment of silence and stillness, um, the noticing of anicca becomes a little more challenging, becomes a little more difficult, because we are so concerned with being with the object. Like, we don't want to let go of the object. So our, all our mental capacity, all our energy goes into being with this object, right? And it's very good for stilling the mind and for calming the mind. But to actually notice anicca sanya, notice the beginning, the arising, the staying for some time, and then the passing away of an object, it becomes very difficult when we are constantly focusing on that singular object. So, as we are meditating, let's say we're sitting and we have this kind of broad perspective, open, relaxed, attentive, welcoming, non judging. Anything that arises, it's so quick and it's so easy to notice the arising, the staying, or the lifespan, and the demise and the passing away very, very quickly. Because when we are not preoccupied with the object, multiple objects pop up. You're with the breath, you're with an itch in the right knee, you're with a prick in the left earlobe, you're with a thought, you're thinking of Paris, you're thinking of Rome, you're thinking of what to eat for breakfast the next day, or how many dishes there are in the sink, whatever it is, right? All of these, they come up in rapid succession because there's this huge space. And so being able to watch the arising, there it is, there's a thought. And before you know it, oh, here's a feeling. Okay, so that's gone. This has come up, right? And so basically, what we are trying to do is get away from things that are constantly changing, get away from things that are compelling, that kind of actually reinforce this idea of ego, reinforce this idea of a controller, reinforce an idea of an owner. And we're just stepping back. That's all we're doing. So by being the screen on which the movie, the film is played, or by being the sky on which the clouds pass, um, we are actually touching something that is not restricted by these three characteristics of anicca, anatta, and dukkha. Right? We know that as we are sitting with this open attitude, we know that an object has arisen. We can see it's arising. We can see it's staying and it's operating. We can see it's passing away. Right? And therefore, whatever is temporary, right, is born into something that is different from its nature, that does not have the characteristic of anicca. And this is the Visankaragatam Chittam. This is why Lumpo Sumedo, all of them call awareness the gateway to the deathless, the gateless gate, however you want to call it. So, yeah, that's so does that seem okay? I'm coming to you, Lorena, but Bob, does that seem okay? Or do you have a follow-up? If you can please comment. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So there are two questions, one from Lorena, the other from Marissa and John. So let's deal with Lorena's first. On a practical note, how can we deal with falling asleep during meditation? Thank you, Lorena. The cheeky answer, you don't need to deal with it. The responsible answer is it a problem? Yoga Nidra, especially if you, okay, so a little bit about my background. I face a lot of chronic pain. I'm dealing with a lot of bodily conditions that are not really conducive to long periods of sitting, or even sometimes short periods of sitting. So I do a lot of lying down meditation, right? And so the lying down posture is a very, very subtle posture, because the body, there's no need for the body to hold itself erect. There's no need for any effort that gets channeled into a physical structure. So because the body is so relaxed, the mind gets equally relaxed, and it's very easy to slip into sleep. And initially, as I started doing this, I used to really get worried. Oh my God, I'm falling asleep all the time. But the more I do it, I notice that there is, even sometimes, sometimes is not the right word. It's becoming more frequent that during these periods that seem like sleep, there is an alertness in the background. And that alertness is becoming more and more prominent. So there's a lot of value to that. If you can get into a extremely relaxed state where there is a sensation of sleep or a feeling of sleep, but yet there is some alertness in the background, that's fantastic. Otherwise, if sleeping during meditation, if you think it's a chronic problem and it leads to a feeling of heaviness, dullness, then you got to do something about it. So when I speak about these times when you fall asleep and there is some alertness in the background and one wakes up feeling very refreshed, very bright, then there's absolutely no problem with that. But when we do sleep, sleep can become very, very result in a heavy feeling, in a feeling of drowsiness, then that needs to be dealt with. So what are some ways of dealing with sleep? Well, in the suttas, there's a very interesting story. Mahamoggalana is in his final leg of practice, right? His enlightenment is imminent. I think within 2 or 3 days, he's going to become an arahant, right? So he's putting forth effort and he's sitting, and halfway through, he starts nodding, falling asleep. Okay, and the Buddha gets to know this through his psychic vision and appears in front of Mahamoggalana and says, Moggallana, are you drowsy? So Moggallana says, yes, I'm drowsy. So the Buddha says, okay, so here are some things that you can do. If you're sitting and you're meditating and you're feeling drowsy, first thing you do is change the object of your meditation, right? Because it could be that this object is causing drowsiness. If that doesn't work, then bring in objects that will brighten your mind. So think of the Buddha, think of the Dhamma, think of the Sangha, and see if that brings in energy. If that doesn't work, bring in a mental perception of light. So imagine what the sun looks like. Or you could look at the light bulb for a few minutes and close your eyes, or look at a candle flame for a few minutes and close your eyes. Bring in a perception of light, right? That'll brighten your mind. If that doesn't work, then it becomes a little, as is often the case with these suttas, becomes a little humorous. He says you can tug on your earlobes, or you can rub your head and your face vigorously, or you can get up and splash water on your face. And if all of these things don't work, Moggallana, then lie down and have a nap. Right. So we've got to be reasonable, realistic, practical. If you feel that you're pushing yourself too much, your body needs to sleep. Sometimes you just need to sleep. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Maybe you've got to figure out what your object of meditation is. Maybe you've got to figure out the times you're meditating. Are you meditating after a long day at work or an exhausting evening with the kids? Or are you meditating, you're waking up too early, you're pushing yourself to get up too early and you're just not bright. Right? So these are some practical steps when it comes to sleep. Okay. So is that okay, Lorena? Yes? Okay, wonderful. I can see Lorena. Wonderful. Okay, so the next question, Marissa and John, can you discuss judgment versus discernment? Yes. So in the Pali and in the Sanskrit, the word for discernment is viveka. Okay. And the word for judgment is pamana. So I'll approach it from a linguistic angle and then move to a more experiential angle. So linguistically, pamana means to weigh or to measure or to count or to spatially put boundaries on, right? So that means this is a restrictive, the nature of this activity is restrictive, right? It's restrictive in nature. It is also exclusionary in nature. So when I say this is it, and anything inside that is good, I want, anything outside that is bad and I don't want, it becomes very restrictive. It's non-inclusive, right? And it is rooted, generally, judgment is always rooted in a reaction. So reaction to the pleasant results in craving. Reaction to the unpleasant results in aversion, right? And this is what we call judgment. Viveka, on the other hand, it means ekam, that is to compare one with the other, or it's not even compare. Viveka. It also has, like the most common English translation of Viveka in the Buddhist texts is seclusion, but that is contextual as well. Viveka, discernment, it is not rooted in reaction. It is actually rooted in reflection. I want to understand, right? So it's not so much I taste something and I hate it and I judge it as bad, but I'm actually discerning. Why is it that I don't like it? What is it about it that I don't like? And we are also looking at the nature of it, which is not an exclusion of anything, but actually it is a wisdom forming activity. I look at something, I study it, I want to understand it, and then I try and use it wisely. Right? So I think that is the difference, or broadly the differences between judgment and discernment. So judgment is kind of rooted in an exclusionary, craving, reactionary place. Discernment is rooted more in wisdom and understanding and reflection, and how it can be used for benefit. Okay? Does that seem okay, Marissa and John?